So as I said, I'm Laura Davis from BASE, and I'm here to kind of set the scene today around kind of disability inclusive recruitment for all, looking at what's happening nationally in this space, some of the good practice that's out there, and really thinking about how we support employers to move from disability confident to disability confident in action. I think it's always useful to kind of share a little bit about myself before I think sharing a bit more about the charity and the work that we do. I am also the mum of 3 disabled and neurodivergent young people and a foster family. So we have lots of lived experience and can share both perspectives of what it's like trying to support employers better in this space, but the impact that this work has on whole families and communities. So a little bit about the charity. So the British Association for Supported Employment is a national members charity. We've got about 350 members across the UK who all support disabled, neurodivergent and disadvantaged people into good quality careers. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that's really important and the government shift, which has moved from a kind of an any job approach into one which is about really making sure that we're meeting the needs and aspirations and wishes of people and meeting the business needs of employers. I'm also the Chief Executive of Inclusive Trading, which is our associated organisation that delivers lots of training and support out to employers when they're looking at how they move from disability confident to actually building that in action. So I want to start a little bit around the supported employment model and why. Why is it different? Why are employers now starting to use this model almost as a framework to help them to actually start to embed inclusive recruitment into their workforce planning? I think it's really important to kind of set the scene as where we're at. So we've got about 2.8 million disabled people that are currently economically inactive. And I would always challenge that a little bit. I would say economically excluded, because actually in all the work that we do, over 80% of disabled and neurodivergent people talk about wanting to have access to a good quality career. But actually all of the evidence shows us that it's quite often the employee life cycle and actually the barriers that sit within that and some of the wider barriers in society that prevent people from accessing those. We need to break it down when we think about particular groups of people. So people with a learning disability and autism remain the most excluded groups from the workforce, with only around 4.8% of adults with a learning disability and autism known to social care having access to any kind of employment. And then when you think about people who are blind or have a visual impairment, that's around 30%. So the government has got an ambitious target, which is around an 80%. So they want to look at 80% of disabled people accessing a good career. It's an ambition that we wholly support, but it is going to need a whole system coming together to make sure that that ambition can be achieved. We also hear lots of work that's talking around how do we bring people in through that kind of early careers piece. And I think it's really important to know that 80% of disabilities are required during the lifetime of somebody working for you. So we're not just talking about early careers, we're talking about future-proofing organisations. So again, we do lots of work with employers for them to understand you can't afford to not do this work. So the supported employment model is an internationally evidence-based model that actually was designed in the United States of America in around the 70s and came over to the UK. And it's based on a set of principles. I don't know about anybody else that's on this call, but I have never been ready for any job I've ever done in my entire life. I'm not entirely sure I'm ready for the job I'm doing now. But actually, when we look at a lot of the programs that were set up in terms of supporting disabled and neurodivergent people into work, it made people jump through endless hoops to prove their worthiness or their ability to actually come into the labour market. And the evidence shows us you get people a job. So you think about a certain amount of skills and strengths that we all have, you get a job and then you layer those skills up as you're actually in the workplace. And the evidence shows us that through the supported employment model, that same principle should apply. So we talk about the place, train, maintain, and then flourish model. It's also set on a set of values, which is thinking around the employer and the employee being an equal partner. Too often things are done to people, and actually there is a really clear set of principles around how you work in partnership. It's got 5 stages to it, and I'm not going to go into this in great detail because of time, but if I just touch upon each of them. So it starts with actually actively going out into community. So not waiting for people to have to come through Job Centre Plus's doors. It's about going into communities and inspiring and engaging with people to think about work being a really good option. You then go through a process called vocational profiling, which is a really rich way of building up an understanding of who somebody is. And it moves away from that transactional, let's just build a CV, because again, we know that a CV in itself doesn't get people a job. It's about kind of understanding everything about someone's strengths, aspirations, skills, how are you going to get to work? You then go out and do exactly the same thing within employers. That employer engagement piece is coming out and working with employers to genuinely and truly understand the business needs of that employer, thinking about the entire life cycle and where the barriers or opportunities may be. And you go through a process called job analysis. So again, that's building that really rich picture of who that employer is and what they might need. And then you take those 2 tools, so the vocational profile and the job analysis, and you carefully match people together. Again, this is matching not just around can the person do the job, it's is that person going to flourish? Is it going to work for everybody? And then crucially to the model, it's about making sure that people have good quality in-work support. So through qualified job coaches who will work alongside an individual and an employer. And then making sure that we are focusing on career development. So we're doing lots of work in this space at the moment around building truly accessible apprenticeship pathways, for example, and making sure that there's equity in that space. The model also has a set of national occupational standards that underpins all of the work that's done. And this is really a set of values. So talks about things like a zero rejection philosophy. I believe absolutely fundamentally that anybody can work with the right job and the right support as long as they are motivated. And that motivation piece you have to unpick. Because actually, if you've been told your whole life you're never going to work, then actually suddenly trying to tell somebody that they can is much more difficult. We believe that work readiness is not a helpful concept. We've already talked about, none of us have ever truly been ready for any job that we do. So why do we have that expectation of disabled and neurodivergent people? And then making sure that we're building in things like the social model of disability into everything that we do. So we have at the moment around 19,500 employers that are signed up to Disability Confident, and around 600 of those sit at that Disability Confident level 3, so that leadership status. Now, within BASE, we do lots of validation with organisations that are either looking to kind of go into level 3 or are progressing through level 1 and level 2, and we hear the same thing from all of them, which is Disability Confident is good, but it doesn't tell you how. It tells you the why you need to do things and it gives you a framework, but it doesn't provide any of that guidance around things that you need to do. And out of that disability confident numbers, we know that the evidence from King's College London shows that actually organisations that are disability confident signed up don't actually employ any more disabled or neurodivergent people than any other organisation. So what we know works is that organisations that actually work with partners to look at the entire life cycle of their employees, so to think around right from that attraction piece all the way through to separation, and looking at what are the barriers that are preventing people from entering into the labour market. And quite often it is the recruitment process itself. So actually when your recruitment processes are heavily focused on people always having to articulate their competencies rather than thinking about how people can demonstrate them. We know that some of the really good practice within employers is things like making sure that you're baking in adjustments right the way through the process. So that can include just as standard making sure that you send out interview questions 48 hours in advance as a minimum. These are things that don't cost a load of money. It's just a way of doing things differently that can start to build in equity within that process. We're also doing lots of work with employers who have really good policies around things like adjustments, but don't actually have a process, so don't understand who is responsible within an organisation to do which part of the adjustment. And we know lots of employers tell us that actually they find the word reasonable really confusing. They don't know what reasonable means. And so we're doing lots of work with employers to think about how do you unpick that and make sure that you're baking in as many of these things into the way that you work with everybody. Inclusion is good for everybody. You get this right for disabled people, I promise you, you will get it right for large parts of your workforce. And remembering that statistic again, that 80% of disabilities are required during the lifetime of someone working for you. You may not think you have any disabled people working for you now. You probably have, but you definitely will in the future. So really thinking about how you build in an adjustments process, not just a policy, as soon as possible is one of the most effective things you can do. The other biggest thing that we hear from employers is where there is a real intent, and what I must stress is, of all the employers that we work with, people want to do the right thing. Employers want to be more inclusive, but don't always know how to do it. But there's often sometimes an over reliance on this being driven through kind of HRBPs or being driven through kind of ED&I initiatives. And where we see things working really well is where there is a real engagement with line managers. They are absolutely critical to people having a good experience throughout the life cycle of kind of building inclusive recruitment programs. So making sure that employers, when they're actually thinking around the support that they're going to give their line managers, ensuring that there is something in there around adjustments, what that looks like, and how you have conversations with people. Disabled and neurodivergent people are the absolute experts, but people are so worried about saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing that they just don't ask at all. And so there is some guidance out there to support employers to know how you start and have good conversations with people. So there are lots of common myths and misconceptions out there. And again, I'm not going to go through kind of all of them necessarily, but these are some of the main ones that we hear from employers. So this notion that disabled individuals are less productive, there is absolutely no evidence. In actual fact, all of the evidence from organisations like Deloitte shows the complete opposite, that teams that are more diverse tend to be more productive, they tend to be more innovative. And so actually thinking around how you build in a strength-based process into your workforce planning really can drive that competitive edge that employers are starting to kind of really need to think about. Another one that comes up a lot is around kind of health and safety in the workplace. So I hear from employers, oh, it's not very safe to bring disabled people into a workplace. And again, there is absolutely no evidence that that is true. The opposite has been evidence that actually workforces that have disabled and neurodivergent people working in them tend to be much more diligent around ensuring that health and safety principles are applied and that workspaces are safer. I would like to tell a wonderful story about a young man that we worked with who has Down syndrome and wanted to work on a building site. Everyone said, oh, that's going to be too difficult. This is never going to work. And he went in and absolutely proved them all wrong. And not only did he go in and do the most amazing job, but actually when they looked at both their near misses and their actual cases of kind of health and safety breaches, they fell by over 100% because the rest of the team were making sure that they were role modeling for Todd in his workplace. So there is a lot of evidence that actually building inclusion in not only it massively improves health and safety. A big one, I think, is really that moving away from this concept that hiring disabled and neurodivergent people is part of your corporate social responsibility agenda. This just makes really good business sense. When we're hearing from employers around a talent shortage, where people are trying to kind of navigate where they're accessing from the same pools of talent, why would you not want to be thinking about a hidden talent pool of people that are motivated and desperate to work? And by making some simple adjustments to how you manage the recruitment process, you can access all of that talent. Again, I'll go back to over 80% of disabled and neurodivergent people want to work with you as an organisation. So there's a really good business benefit for doing this. And I think the last one is that kind of this notion that disabled people require constant supervision. And it's just simply not true. And when you're thinking about those people with who are kind of further away from the labour market, and the model that I described before with supported employment, where actually you have qualified job coaches that can come and work alongside somebody to bridge that gap between what would be reasonable and the additional support that people need. So I would urge kind of organisations that are on the beginning of this journey to think about what are the partnerships that you can build. Will there ever be a right time? potentially from an employer's perspective, they will always come up with a reason why they can't, or don't feel confident enough to progress in this space. And I would say, just do it. So why are the government now using the supported employment model to underpin their new Connect to Work programme? Well, for a number of different reasons, but mainly because there is a really clear international evidence base that this works, not only for individuals, but it works for employers. I can connect anyone who's on this call with a whole range of employers that have actually utilised the supported employment model to get them on their journey. It is not the answer to everything, but it can actually get you started. So government has invested in supporting 300,000 people into employment, and these are individuals that have the most kind of complex barriers into employment. That is disabled people, neurodivergent people, people with long-term health conditions, mental health conditions, people who are ex-offenders, care leavers, and anyone that has those kind of more complex needs. And again, it's working on that basis around making sure that people are being well matched. So describe the supported employment model that I described previously as being underpinned within the government's Connect to Work programme. So you would have a dedicated employment specialist that would work alongside you to match participants with the open vacancies that you have, but also to talk through things like job shaping. And I'll be really clear, job shaping is not job creation. It's not about creating special jobs. It's about actually thinking around how you can plan your workforce planning in a slightly different way that still meets your business needs and attracts and supports more diverse people into your workforce. It's then about building up that ongoing relationship. So this program is a 12-month program. Nobody is mandated onto it. So again, we heard from lots of employers that with some of the previous government schemes, part of the challenge that people were being made to go on it. This is a voluntary program, so anybody signed up is doing so because they're motivated to do so. It's a 12-month wraparound support, so both the individual and the employer gets access to that 12 months of support. And there is also an in-work element to it. So anybody that is in work but is at risk of losing their job could potentially access the Connect to Work programme. I think a really important part of the government scheme is also that it will be quality assured. We know what works. There is an evidence around it. There is a framework that has been developed. So any provider that will be delivering the Connect to Work programme will have to go through a quality assurance process. So I guess again, from an employer's perspective, you know that you're going to be working with providers that are going to be doing the right thing, working alongside the right set of values and actually helping you to embed inclusive recruitment in action. This is what it's all about, actually having that aspiration that anybody can work. I can tell you now that as the parent of my eldest daughter has a learning disability, my middle daughter is autistic, and my youngest daughter has ADHD. I have to tell you that is the very least interesting thing about all of them. They are the most wonderful human beings. But if my eldest daughter didn't have a job, I could not do the job that I do now. The difference it has made to her life in terms of how she views herself, and from her employer's perspective, she's never taken a day off sick. That's not because she feels she can't take a day off sick, but she just never has. She is incredibly productive. She's a wonderful member of that team. And I think another stat that really kind of drives home the impact that this work has for communities in which all of you serve, and I think particularly relevant to the sector that you're all working in, is that we know people with a learning disability and autism that have access to paid employment live 15 years longer. 15 years. So think about the impact that starting on this journey and embedding inclusive recruitment can have on individuals, families, and whole communities, and actually driving up and improving the health of a marginalised group of people. So I was really hoping that we would have some employers here today with us. But again, it's a particularly tricky time of the year for everybody, but we'll make sure that we can connect organisations out. But I think this is just a wonderful case study from an employer who, again, is really kind of shaping and driving through that this was not about doing the right thing. This was about meeting a business need, but it is also doing the right thing. And I think I'm just going to read one of those kind of statements, which is, one of our most successful experience involved hiring a participant with a learning disability. The process began with an in-depth job analysis conducted by an employment coach, ensuring they understood both the role and the unique needs of the candidate. This analysis defined the job expectations, how best to accommodate the employer's requirements. This personalised approach ensured that our new employee felt empowered and confident in their role. So what I'm really describing is how we can kind of support organisations to move from the why to the how. So we have got some free digital accessibility training for any organisations that would like to have a look at that. There are also a load of free videos on there, and we have got some free guides for employers as well. As I say, this is part of the ecosystem that's needed, so I'm never going to come on a call and say that supported employment is the solution to everything, but I think it really can be part of your workforce strategy. So if anybody wants to connect with me kind of individually, be very happy to. And as I say, I think the bit that I can kind of add most value is connecting you out to other employers that really are leading on that disability confident in action piece. So thank you so much.
Amazing, thank you, Laura. That's really gives some real context into, you know, real life examples, which is what this is really about. And making sure that they've got all that information that is needed to kind of implement within their workforce as well. So I think that's amazing. Thank you.